All right. Hello. Okay, so everyone can hear me now? Hi, I'm Johan. I'm very happy to be here. Always appreciate going to London. I'm here to talk about usable software design, and in particular how we can take ideas from normal usability and perhaps apply them to code. What are the ramifications of that? So I'm a developer. I live in France, in Grenoble, and so it's not that far. One of the things that really helped me with usable software was it goes back to looking at the problem, and it turns the attention away from the solution. Talking about solution is very conflictual. Talking about the problem can unite things. Let's see how. First of all, design has a great impact. The iPhone showed to a lot of us that great impact that it can have. It's not only how it looks, but it's actually how it works. Could it be that how we design code actually has an impact on how the code works and how the development works in our team? Maybe. Who knows? There's, you know this guy. It's funny he's not presenting this because it was his original idea of applying this concept to code. He eventually published a book a year ago. I recommend it. It's very much how concretely you can apply it tomorrow to your project. But it comes from a more general idea that we're all designers, whatever we do. So like a teacher who's preparing a course for the children is designing their user experience. As a chef who prepares a meal is designing a user experience for the attendees. And likewise, a dentist is designing a user experience for the patients, right? Not always that good. But we as developers, we are designing the user experience of the developers that will come after us, and they will have to add features on top of that. Effectively using the code that I create today as a working tool tomorrow. So as a craftsman, you have better quality work, better your tools are, better the quality of your work is. So maybe I can have an impact on the quality of work of people later on in the project. Well, it turns out that that impact is not always all that positive. Not all design is successful. This is an artist named Jack Carlman that first proved this by designing impossible-to-use objects. This is a later version of a similar idea. So yeah, we can have a great impact. It's not because the code does the job that it's well designed. So what is design? Well, there's several definitions. One of the most simple ones is one created by Nielsen. So there are 5 axes of usability. Learnability, that's how fast, how much you have to learn to be able to use the tool to do basic tasks. The entry step. And efficiency is the one you should have learned the tool, how fast can you do what you want to do with it. Memorability is given like 2 months away from the tool. There are a lot of things you have to relearn. Or have you forgotten things that are going to make you do certain errors or mistakes or going to slow you down? It brings us to errors. That's a part of usability. How likely are you to do an error? And how often do you errors? And how costly is it to fix them? If they are not likely to do errors and the errors are not costly to fix, then they have a good usability. And there's a 5th aspect, which is satisfaction, user satisfaction. And I don't know yet if it relates to our code. In some ways I do, but it might be a result of the other ones. But anyway, I'll concentrate on the first 4 ones. So given that we know what design is, one of the things that designers do is they go about identifying design problems. So we have the most expert designers that actively go and look for design problems they created, usability problems they created. So it's not really a matter of how much you learn or how good a designer you are. You will always make design errors. Why? Because you know the problem you're solving and you created the solution. So you cannot have the eyes of a user which is new to the problem and new to the solution. So you can leverage other people to do that. This is like in the beginning of my career, or like, I don't know, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought of giving my code to be reviewed by some beginner programmer. I was already a good programmer, right? So it'd be like lowering myself to do that. It's like, I mean, I'm not proud of that, but I have changed now. And I've discovered that whoever I give my code to, I get useful feedback on the quality of the designs. Because then in the end, who is going to use that code? It's all the developers on the team. So their difficulties are valid in many ways. And one of the things you can do to do that, or one of the things the designers do, is they do user interviews. So someone has used a tool, and what was it like, what was difficult, and so on. This has been translated into like code by Alexandro. This is from the book. The first sentence is, what was difficult to do in the past weeks? That targets learnability or efficiency. So it took long to do that. And the second sentence, it targets learnability in particular. And the third question, which targets errors. So whenever I was afraid, I went slower, or I might have actually introduced some bugs, you know. So these are all like the end result that you want to get out of an interview like this is low-hanging fruit, easy to do optimizations that's going to improve learnability, efficiency, or error reduction of errors. Typically, you do this in a retrospective. And it's funny, the first time I did that, I had been working for most of the sprint on a major refactoring, and it turns out that my code was the biggest problem in that retrospective. But what was impressive was there was quite a lot of people had quite some difficulty to understand that or try to start using that. But the solution was to rename 3 methods. So the solution had almost no cost. Isn't that wonderful? And why was that? I mean, I had, in the beginning, created a method name, and during the course of my refactoring, it had lost it was not the right name anymore. But I couldn't see that. I wasn't looking at the method names. I knew what that method was doing. That way, I am not my user. I cannot have the eyes of my user, or that's at least very, very difficult. But anyone can find that problem. So I actively use other people to improve my design. Another thing you can do is usability tests. So this can, a lot of the time we imagine very fancy things with usability tests, you know, like you have a screen and you can see people through a window, they can see you, or you video record it and so on. And there are really good things you can do, and I've done it 2 occasions. I've written a scenario, as suggested Alexandro, written a scenario, and people did that and would observe their progress and what was difficult, and it took like, I don't know, half hours, maybe 2 hours. But it felt like I wasn't be able to do that often enough, so I took Steve Krug's advice on this excellent book. He said, like, yeah, usability tests, you have to make them so cheap that you'll do them regularly. One thing you can do is that you've written a piece of code and someone is going to start working on that code, so you just sit with them for a while and see what are their first difficulties in approaching this piece of code. And that's something you can do very, very often, and that I do very, very often. And usually you find small documentation things or renames that you will apply. All right, so another thing we can do is we have code reviews. They can spot problems, but they can also be a problem in themselves because there's conflict during I don't like this piece of code. So whenever I don't like a piece of code, one of the things that I use is there a usability that can be traced to what I don't like? So maybe I see that it is error prone. A developer can use it in the wrong way. And then I can ask the person a question. So I think there is a possibility of error here. Is there another design that will minimize that and still score fairly well on the others? Or can we find the solution that scores best along these axes of usability? And it turns into a very constructive discussion. And I can also, it helps me also analyze with me more clear about what's the problem. And the it was around 3 years ago that I first got this idea from Alexandro, and I was working on a project which was could have been quite a disaster. I just come there and the lead, well, the manager, told me a little bit about the chief architect of that project. So I was there to teach them TDD and help them succeed with their testing strategy and so on. And this guy, he was famous in that company, this architect, because in a previous failed project, there was an audit to see what went so wrong in this project. And he reported it was because of the unit tests. Oh, okay. So what do I do now? I mean, traditional approach is not going to work. It's not likely he's going to be convinced. What can I do? Well, you can't really win against one, but you can win with someone. So is there some kind of uniting ground here between him and also all the other developers? I definitely saw that in usability, you go back into the problem. Like everyone wants learnability, efficiency, memorability, lack of errors. Everyone wants that. It's just the solutions that might differ. So in there is a federating ground. And this is what we came up with. What do we value? Like specifically, I asked them to not frame solutions, but more like frame qualities that we would like to have of our code. And I could have imposed usability, but then again would have been like, I bring a solution to you guys and I'm imposing usability for us as a team. But if you look at this, this is very close to usability. So code written to be read, that's learnability. The second one is learnability on efficiency. Third one, minimal ripple effect, is lack of errors. The fourth one is interesting, simple and easy to validate. So while he was fan of manual testing, I was fan of automated testing. But when you do things like put it in a harness so that maybe you can start the application really quickly instead of in a like heavy container, then you do quite the same refactorings. Like start to form a hexagon of the application as you will for the tests. So looking for different things, seemingly different things, we're basically looking pretty much for the same thing and we're working in the same direction. And I never said, for instance, that we need to do more tests. No, we need some way of like not breaking the thing too often. And yeah, I can go on about that, but it was a very, very helpful way of taking some distance and finding some common ground with people. So you can imagine that it marked me for quite a while after the experience. Anyway, so let's go into, these are not so technical things, but there are also technical aspects of this. So let's go into some parallels of the code. Well, before we go into the code, let's look at normal usability. So the first thing here is push or pull. So we don't know, should we push or pull to the left? And in the middle one is a good example of usability. You know that you push. And the third example, anyone recognize the third example? Yeah, it's the toilet here, right? The toilet here. Did anyone push on the wrong corner of the door? Yeah, so there is no incitation, there is no suggestion. What is the right usage? In code, most clear example of this insight to use it the correct way is the builder pattern. It's a very, very easy way of lowering the learnability, or by lowering the learning step to be able to use something. And it's very commonly used in APIs that have complex initialization. Another thing is consistency. There's great value in consistency in the world. Like, these are almost international. Maybe they are actually international. And it's very, very easy to learn. This is an exercise from elementary school. So you know what is warning, you know what is just a suggestion, right? And what is forbidden. In code, there's a lot of value in consistency too. A lot of projects try to have consistency by putting all the controllers in one place and then all the DAOs in one place and all the views in one place and so on. And you get consistency. You know where to go and look for it, right? But what value are you getting out of that consistency? Not much. So there's another way you can get some other value, which I'll talk about in a minute, but still keep some kind of consistency. This is an idea I stole from Sandro the first time. He was the one who introduced me to this. You get, if you want to find the controllers, you just open up find file controller, and you have a list of them. So you don't have to put them in the same package. So you can have both things, like a navigability, which is along the features, and a consistent way of finding a controller, if that's what you're looking for. And on the value that you get from this is that you don't have to navigate so far. Or you can even break things out of the application, like pull out a microservice. So this is not new. In 1972, there was this paper. It's like argued that you should organize your code that minimize the effect of changes. So in how many places I change the code. This is something we often, when you do microservices, we're actually looking for a way of splitting our code, but we're not really confident that we can actually do this modularization inside an application. And one example here would be like there's one part which is more consistent, which is editing the videos, and one thing that can go a bit further away, which is search mechanism, that can even be pulled out to a separate service. And the amount of consistency, you might want to need consistency in this upper part here, because they're very closely related, but you don't need it so much in the other one. That's important, because in my kind of work, and I imagine almost all craftsmen try to change a lot of things. But changing things is going to reduce homogeneity and consistency across the system. So we're looking for one good thing, but we're trading another. So being precise about what kind of consistency we keep, to me, is important. So there's another aspect. When we design something, we have to think about who is our user, and in particular, like MS Paint is very compatible with me, for instance. I don't know anything about Photoshop, so I prefer to use Min Paint. But for other people, they prefer a more efficient tool, and they sacrifice learnability. In code, there's a nice parallel. I don't know, have you ever had the argument about whether we should use lambdas or whether we should use for loops? Who had that? Who has an argument in their team, or has had an argument in their team about? Yeah, a few of you. D3. These codes do the same thing, right? And I would argue that this code is more usable to normal developers, because there's, of course, you have to learn, you have to spend some learning to get used to this, right? Because you already learned this, right? But it's a good return on investment. But you might get, when you ask for people to review your code, you might get like, I don't like this, you know. But why don't they like it? Should we maybe like do some experiments, or should we do a dojo on it, and then we can decide whether we should do this or not? In fact, this is to illustrate that we must listen to our users, but we don't have necessarily to obey their advice. And it's not because we start usability testing that we have to blindly follow what people think about it. So there's another thing, I like TDD a lot. TDD to me is a very deterministic action. I know pretty much where I'm going, and pretty much I know how to get there. There's another popular way of developing software, which is trial and error. Like, I edit some JavaScript code and I reload the browser and I see what happens, you know, and then I find where to modify, and then when I'm done, I ship it, you know. Those are popular ways of working. But there's a usability difference between both of them. I want to show you an example when I tried to apply TDD on a front end, and I wanted to delete a part of the page, an object in the page. And it turns out that object will link to a lot of things, so I had to assert this. So I pretty much knew this. I knew about 3, and quickly found out about 3 or 4 things that I had to call. So my test had to state, okay, given this state, then the effect is I call these things. So I did this in TDD and was happy, and then when I loaded it up, I had to add another one because I had forgotten one. It was obvious. But I was fairly happy with the efficiency of my work, so I shipped it. It went through code review, and then a day later, someone told me, Johan, didn't you work on this thing? It doesn't work correctly now, you know. Oh, it's a pity. I did it in TDD, but it didn't work, so I'm a bit sad. And so I fixed that, added the test, and shipped it again. And like 3 days later, someone said, like, Johan, didn't you work on this? It doesn't work correctly. So now I'm really unhappy about the efficiency of my TDD and the quality of my work, right? So I would probably have been better off just doing trial and error, right? But that's very unsatisfying. So what's really happening here? Well, we have a design smell. We have design smell due to distributed mutable state. And there's no central point which controls this. And so we have a learn and memorability problems, because in 2 months when I come back to this, I'm not going to remember which ones to call when I'm going to do a second delete action on something else, you know. So there's a clear link here where it says that actually when you do TDD, you have to know what is representative state beginning, then which method to call, and then what are the end result, what is everything that's going to change. And when you don't have that, you have a learnability and usability, memorability problem, which is far more important than, to some people, than whether you can do TDD or not in that project. In this case, I motivated major refactoring by showing this is going to be a problem for the rest of the life of the project. It's not about TDD. I didn't even speak about TDD. But I discovered it through TDD. Tests are like this, you know, but there's they cry a lot when something is wrong. And as parents, we learn with time to understand what's wrong. It's not the babies that are telling us. So readability is another interesting thing. There's a real difference between like Wikipedia and this is a plugin for Wikipedia, same page, a lot more pleasant to read, right? So in code we have code like this, which is not so pleasant to read, especially when it goes out of screen, right? Has anyone looked at someone looking at code where the lines go further than the screen, typically on laptops. What do? Do they cut the line in two, or do they scroll? Turns out, from my empirical evidence, a lot of people scroll several times in the same file. And so whenever I write a long line, I'm really impeding the speed at which people will digest the code and the speed at which their understanding of the code. So of course we do this, you know. It's well worth our time. Even just when we're reading the code, it's well worth our time to do that. And we can even put it further to really express the intent and hide the implementation details of the transport mechanism. Information density. Like sometimes you want a lot of information all over the place, but sometimes you don't. And these are different design paths. In code, we tend to do the less thing sometimes. You know, just randomly put some code there and it's good, right? It's the same code on the right, just a bit more organized. And that what you do is like, what I want to do with this is I want to express the intent. I want to expose the things that are likely to change. So this is a setup of a Selenium test, and this is basically a page object, and I probably have several page objects, so it's easy to take this piece of code and modify it for another page or for another part of the system. So that's a deliberate design decision. This works, but it's a lack of design decision. Right, so there's another thing I really like, which is documentation and code comments. So when the design is obvious, you don't need documentation. And in fact, it actually slows you down because you have to maintain the documentation, right? So, I don't know. What do you think about this? It's all over the place, right? It's all over the place. And you know, there's a maintenance cost here because you're going to change this maybe in a year or two, right? It's starting to decay. So, but here it's actually good, right? Because I was putting my hands there, and nothing happens, you know. And there's this obscure button here, which I would have tried, but definitely this actually helps, you know. Yeah, it's true. It's wrong. It's wrong. Yeah. Though there's more documentation in the toilets. Yeah. So it's actually valuable. So whenever you cannot do that, documentation brings value. When it can't be obvious in your design, documentation has value. To be fair. So another part of this is limiting errors, making errors impossible. You've heard of Pokayoke in Lean, or BugsZero. BugsZero is a very small movement now, but it's basically eliminating little by little, based much on empirical evidence, errors in a project. And you do this in user interfaces a lot. So date picker. Have no invalid dates, right? And like this thing where you fill in, it kind of reduces the likelihood of an error. In code, if we look at constructing a class of menu, we have many alternatives. So we have menu, no, and then we have setters. So is that error prone or not? Well, we can improve that. That's less improved because you don't know. Here you don't know. You can have a menu with only dessert or nothing. You know, it doesn't make sense, right? But here we're stating that a valid menu has 3 courses, maybe 3 and 2. I don't know, but you can clearly express that. But there's still a source of error here, because you can easily, like, you see, main course is for argument, so maybe it's likely that someone gonna pass starter as the first argument. And then you can move into a design decision where you type the parameters and you make that error impossible. So typically statically typed languages are very good for that, making errors impossible. So then these are, I think, generally good practices. Again, it's not the user's fault, it's the design fault. Well, actually, maybe no, that's not true, but at least every improvement lies within the design. You cannot ask users to behave better. So we can redesign to remove two-time instantiation. We can also remove temporal coupling, at least in a statical system, or at least, yeah, in any system. And we can greatly introduce cohesion where there is coupling. So that's making errors impossible, but there's also, like, sometimes we cannot make them impossible, but we can allow for them. Google does that very well. And in code, does anyone spot a problem in this code? Sorry? Sorry? It's yeah. Yeah, in the configuration file, you have to put a slash in the end, and then the other is bug. This is actually a bug that I have I've had in a project, and typically you have a lot of configuration bugs, right? Yeah, can't do anything about that, can you? Well, I don't know. Maybe there's no. Maybe the idea of configuration bugs is a false concept. Maybe they're all design bugs. So one efficient way of doing this is encapsulating primitives. I think this is a very strong subject, so I created a kata for this, where you practice reading through a code base to identify design weaknesses. And when you do that, you train yourself in changing the design so that you will be able to make that error impossible or fix that error. Another usability thing is that whenever a user interface gets a rapid feedback, we're very happy. That's more usable. So here's an example from Amazon. You have to submit to get the errors. But we're getting used to this kind of interface, where as we type or as we tab out of a field, we get feedback. And likewise in code, we're getting used to very quick test suites. We can actually improve the usability of our application if we improve the speed of the test suite. But more than just looking at the unit tests, in a general sense, what we want to do is we want to narrow the funnel of feedback so that more things are discovered high up, less things are discovered late in the process, of course. I have an experience where we were trying to apply BugsZero to a project. So basically, based on all the bugs that we introduced, what can we improve in the process so that this bug will not happen again or will be caught earlier? And one of the things we did a refactoring where we changed we did a lot of things in that refactoring, but at one point we injected a new collaborator. We replaced an old collaborator with a new one. It turned out that this new collaborator didn't have one of the methods that was being used. So what can we do to bring it, what level can we bring it up to? So this actually passed code review, went into the dev platform, was discovered by another team, so it had like a cost of several hours. So what can we do? Can we test better? Well, yeah, we were using mocks, so yeah, maybe that wouldn't have helped, you know. And it was JavaScript, so yeah, maybe that wouldn't have helped at all. Could we be more thoughtful about in the code review or change something else systematically? Well, it turns out the easiest fruit to pick was to pass to TypeScript. Code doesn't compile, and all of a sudden we go from here to here, like within 1 second we discover the bug. And there was no like discussion, like when we had the idea, okay, let's try TypeScript. It was just natural. And little by little, we try to improve the funnel for this project. So if you want to dig deeper into this, I really advise you to if you want a really quick feedback, this one is going to be applicable right away. This one is, you change the way you look at the world. And this is specifically about how to use usability tests. I think there's a lot of listening to why we're doing it and how it relates to actual business success. So I found this first load of programming. I don't know if it's proven, but lowering quality lengthens development time. But quality, I'm not really happy with that name because it's so vague and can be interpreted in so many ways, and yeah, you're not sure that you're getting to the lean value of it. However, in usability, I think we're getting closer to the actual business value of what we're trying to do in the craftsmanship community. So to conclude, it's not the user's fault, so we can actually design better, and almost all improvements are in the design. And you're not your user, so no matter how good we become, we still need feedback from all other people, no matter their skill level. And also, never forget to start with why. It's so much more federating, and I think that's like, in this community we have had started with being quite fundamentalist about things we do, and that works up to a certain point. But at one point, fundamentalism is not working. When we're crossing the chasm, so not convincing the early adopters, but the others, then fundamentalism or prescribing things is not going to work. And we need to find more ways to unite and to look at the core value. I think we can relate business success to usable software. Thank you. We've got some time for questions if you like. And
Ooh, that wasn't good. Any questions? Sure? Last chance? Okay, cool. Oh, one over here.
Got a question?
It's more of a asking for what your thoughts are, but I was curious when a potential bug becomes a dependency of software. What are your thoughts on that?
when a bug becomes a dependency?
Yes.
I'm
trying to think of a good example, but in past times, there's been bugs that have been accepted as part of the feature, even though it wasn't intended for that.
Okay.
And now future functionality, you can't resolve that bug because it changes everything.
Mm.
The user depends on it, or the system depends on it. Or we could talk later.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, thank you. I will be happy to talk about this subject with any one of you. So.